After years of teaching business and entrepreneurship, I found that when guest speakers revealed the hardships and mistakes made throughout their professional and personal lives, it resonated with my students. That's when I thought, why not share these stories so that other entrepreneurs have access to the same insights for education and inspiration? I'm Cassmer Ward, and this is Influencing Entrepreneurs. On this episode, we speak with Kathi Alexander of Sugar Handmade Gourmet Donuts. In 2014, Kathi, a former healthcare sales executive, decided it was time to combine her experience in startup ventures with her love of creating fresh handmade pastries. The result was Charlotte's first artisanal donut concept, Sugar Handmade Gourmet Donuts. She and her business partner started Charlotte's first and only donut food truck, which quickly gained popularity throughout the city. Just 1 year later, Sugar's first retail location opened and quickly built a loyal following for the shop's beautiful handcrafted donuts and pastries. Why don't you tell everybody what your background was and what your career was?
Right. So as you mentioned, I was in healthcare sales and really spent most of my career working for startup healthcare companies, both on the service side and rehab services, home health services, and then later on medical device startup companies. So in fact, one I worked with recently here in Charlotte was Clear Collar. So I had seen a lot of small organizations grow into larger organizations with many branches or many clinics in the case of healthcare. And I was fascinated by the idea of taking a product or a service, creating something new, and then taking it into a marketplace and then watching it grow.
Your background is in sales for medical startups, selling training and services, and before you went down the donut road, you also had another venture in between that.
Exactly. So while I was in sales and marketing, I was doing a lot of writing and would write for various healthcare publications. And then I had children late in life and took some time off with the kids. And during that time, I started to, I co-wrote a book on the topic of labor pain relief because it was an experience I had just had and thought needed some improvement. And so I really used, again, kind of the same startup know-how to pitch a book idea to a publishing company, and they liked the idea. And then a couple of years later, the book ended up being published by Random House, and so it was yet another kind of startup project that I did. That
I was going to say it really is no different than you're selling your concept to get a publisher on board.
Exactly.
So that's pretty much
pitch. Yeah.
A pitch that you have to deliver. Then you have to actually deliver the output. So you lock yourself in a room for months and write your book.
Right.
And then once it's published and printed, then you have to go sell it once again.
Exactly. In fact, I did just that. I spent a year having articles placed in various parenting, childbirth magazines and websites throughout the country just to position the book and stimulate the growth of the book sales.
Right.
So it's all kind of, although the products are different, the process is very much the same.
Right.
And so getting back to the donuts, it was a similar approach in that I had this idea. I had been traveling through my sales work, traveling to other cities and seeing the concept of these really delicious, handmade, made from scratch donuts and pastries doing very well in other cities. And at that time, Charlotte did not have a shop like that. And so with my business partner, we formed a company that purchased a food truck and then started selling the pastries and donuts off of the food truck throughout the city. And so because I'd not done this before, I had to hire a lot of different consultants, like a pastry consultant to teach us how to make the dough, restaurant consultant to teach us basically if we wanted to go retail, what we would be looking for in terms of location and space. And so it was pretty analogous to, in many ways, healthcare, in the sense that you're looking for, while you're doing one project, you're always looking for how to grow it to the next thing.
So with that, we're making the jump from healthcare sales to author to donuts.
Right.
Three completely, totally unrelated different things.
But donuts was the only one that really reflected what I loved and wanted, because I love baking and I love eating, and it was
Right.
really doing something fun that I thought would incorporate some of the skills that I had learned in my career.
We met when you were in the midst of healthcare sales, and we worked together selling medical devices. So I remember when you had asked me to get involved with Sugar, just to look at some finances and everything. First, let's talk about the original concept was a retail spot. I will either take the credit or the blame, however we want to do it, to say, hey, I came up with a financial model that worked for a food truck. And I've shared this story with other people. I still to this day remember your reaction was like, oh God, no, like a food truck. Because we grew
Right.
up with food trucks that were not very desirable. I said, Kathy, go to Food Truck Friday, just try some food. And I said, we don't even have to do it, but let's have a conversation after that.
Right, and I saw the lines at Food Truck Friday and
Right.
thought, hey, you might be onto something.
Right.
So-
So we start building a model based on food truck, which is a pivot from the original concept that you had. Tell us how that transition kind of affected where you were with
In terms of my decision-making with starting
your
the business.
decision making and launching the business.
Yeah, well, actually, it kind of accelerated it because it was an easier entry into this concept to just buy a food truck rather than committing to a lease and coming up with a bigger sort of investment to have a kitchen outfitted to exactly what we needed specific to our product and that kind of thing. It was a way to get into what I was thinking of quickly and at kind of a lower cost or investment.
Right.
And once that was done, we could very quickly get then out to market into a lot of different parts of the city that had we gone retail, we really would have been in one small location, with a much more of a challenge to get the word out throughout the city.
We decided we're going to work on a donut company, even when the food truck was still up for decision. I remember asking, have we ever made a donut? So we've had many business owners that are like, oh yeah, I've been making this beer in my garage forever, so now I'm going to go into the brewery or whatever. But we did have to literally sit down and painstakingly eat donut after donut.
Yes, it was really
a
a
horrible
challenge.
situation.
But that actually did not bother me at all, that we really did not know how to make the product we were about to venture out to sell, because
Yeah.
I really had faith that, first of all, we could learn, and secondly, that we're in Charlotte, where Johnson & Wales is based, and that there'd be plenty of talent here we could tap into who could help us quickly get up to speed with what we needed to learn to get the product underway.
Right, and I remember you saying those same things, because I honestly still doubted you then that was the case. And as we got closer to launch, realized, oh my gosh, this is a perfect product for this niche that we're going after.
Right.
So we go through, we decide to upfit, and we purchase a food truck, learn how to make donuts. Tell us about the first day the truck opens.
So it was very exciting, for one thing, because first of all, we'd finally done it. We'd achieved that goal, which in itself was very exciting. Seeing the truck for the first time was amazing, because it was really, I thought, beautifully done. And Charlotte had never seen anything like it. We'd never had a gourmet food truck in the city. It was really instant success in terms of wherever we went with the truck. We had very long lines, and we were seeing literally thousands of people or hundreds of people, depending on the event or the venue, who were loving our product, who really kind of got it. They understood that this isn't, and I'm not knocking our competitors, but they understood it's not Krispy Kreme and it's not Dunkin' Donuts, that this is an artisanal, handmade pastry. It's sort of like the kind of pastry or donut your grandmother would have made for you, had she attended culinary school. And people really got it, and so very quickly we were able to get the truck out there, to get the truck noticed, and then to get into events throughout the city with a relative amount of ease.
So with the truck, it was a slight change in what the original vision was. It was exciting. I remember the first day the truck opened and helping make sure that all the register systems and even selling a few donuts myself were up and running. And I got to be honest, there was a whole entrepreneurial romance that went along with that. I remember getting $3 for the first donut I sold, seeing how happy the customer was. I was like, I've sold things that cost a lot more expensive in other businesses and never been this self-fulfilled from that.
Yeah, and on that note, actually, for me, for having come from a sales background, there were two things that delighted me. One was, it was the first time I'd ever been in sales where people were standing in line to buy my product rather than my having to stand up and pitch my product. So that was really exciting. And also that what you just described, that the customer, you could see the instant satisfaction, that this was something that really people loved, that it was unique to them, and that they felt at ease parting with $3 or $4 for a delicious, handmade pastry.
What were some of the challenges that came because of that easier entry into the market?
The challenges that came once we opened retail, or just in general?
With the food truck.
Well, one of the things that we discovered early on, too, as instantly successful as we were with the events that took place, is that the events weren't always predictable. Sometimes, even though we could apply to participate in an event, and almost always, we, as the newcomer, we were welcomed in, and people the organizers saw quickly how we would get a draw, so that helped them with their numbers, getting people through, into the event itself. But that they weren't every day, and so what we discovered quickly was that we really needed to generate our own buzz and to try to find our own venues to sell the donuts. And that was a bit more of a struggle. So if it wasn't a food truck Friday or a fall festival or even a wedding or a big catering event, then we really did have to go back and do a little bit of selling and marketing to make sure that we had the truck out there paying for itself throughout the week in between these big weekend events.
What were the different expectations or performance and operations because we chose a truck to start with as opposed to retail?
One of the reasons, as you recall, we moved into retail is that to operate a truck, and at least in the city of Charlotte, and I think it's probably true for most cities, you have to be basically housed out of a commercial kitchen. And so what you end up doing is paying rent to a commercial kitchen, where you go, in our case, you go back, you make your dough. It's kind of your starting point at the start of the day and ending point at the end of the day. And by law, you have to do that here. That was a big expense. And so what we learned was we might as well open up our own retail shop, create our own kitchen, rather than paying rent to somebody else. And that retail spot can support the truck. Right. So what we found out very quickly, though, was having done that, was that the retail spot actually became the center of our revenue, right. And the truck became more of an arm to our revenue. So it kind of flipped things for us. So the retail basically took care of some of our logistical problems in that we now had our own home base. We didn't have to operate somebody else's hours. Right. We didn't have to pay somebody else. We could hire our own staff and just have more control in general over the process. Also then created, because in retail people are buying donuts in the morning, it created an issue with staffing because the food truck was really more of a PM kind of operation. So then we had to have two different staffs and be open at kind of opposite ends of the day, which eventually led to our deciding that the food truck was not going to actually be the center of things anymore and was not providing us with the kind of revenue that was enhancing our retail business. So we shed the food truck and then focused entirely on the retail.
The other thing that we didn't realize as opposed to the kitchen was the amount, the physical labor that's required with it.
Yeah.
Is exhausting.
And one of the things that having the retail shop allowed us too is that we weren't as weather dependent. that with the truck, and we knew this when we bought the truck, that it was going to be seasonal. And so by then buying our own retail space or leasing our own retail space, we had a lot more predictability over our own sales, because the weather is not going to rain out. If we made 1,000 donuts for an event and it rains at that event, well, that's a bit of a disaster. But if we make 1,000 donuts and it rains and it's a big holiday weekend, we still have the customers coming in. We can still sell the donuts. So the retail really, I have felt it really stabilized our business, and that the food truck was a good entree into what we were doing, but really wasn't going to help us grow.
What are some of the things that have caused real headaches?
Well, we have had some setbacks. One of the things has been, just in the restaurant business, in any concept, staffing is always an issue. Getting and hiring, training, and retaining excellent staff. And I will tell you, we have had some excellent staff, but we've also had some staff that really have cost us time and money. And so that, I think, no matter what you're selling, if it's in the restaurant business, that's always going to be a concern. But we've also just had some unusual things happen. We had kind of a satellite shop out of our Waxhaw location, and there was a fire at that location, not having to do with our shop, but just
right.
that
a neighbor.
Yeah, that was just kind of an unlucky event that set us back, and then we had to scramble and look for another weekend venue, which actually we very quickly found that turned out to be stronger than the original one. So things like that. There's just a lot of kind of even though you're in a one retail setting, when you're trying to grow, there's still a lot of flux, and there's a lot of trying to get your arms around what's the next move and how's that going to grow our revenue. And once it clicks and you see that it's working, just making sure that you're able to keep it going, to keep people coming, and to keep growing. And so we've done that in a number of different ways, actually. I mentioned the Waxhaw location. We also have found that farmers markets have been good, steady kind of satellites for the shop. And so those have those places have kind of replaced what the food truck used to do for us, but it's all in sync with what we're doing at the shop.
What is the nut that has not been able to been cracked?
I think it's just, especially in sales, having come from sales, forecasting is so important. Making your numbers is do or die. Having a quota, living by that quota, understanding, what you need to bring in this year to make sure that you're either covering your costs and hopefully making a little money. And I will tell you, in 5 years between the truck and the shop, that has been very elusive. We understand kind of in general what the trends are certain times of year, but it has been very difficult to predict how many donuts we're going to sell in 1 week or 1 month, and then staff up and operationally fulfill that, either scale down or staff up depending upon those predictions. And I would say even after 5 years, it's still hard to know unless you have a very set event like a wedding or a catering event. And so each day when we come into the shop, because we want to do things fresh and small batch, we're really kind of guesstimating, okay, today we think we're going to sell X number of donuts, let's get those made, and then you try to make sure that you've hit it close enough so that there's not a lot of waste, if any. Ideally there's none, and so that you've staffed accordingly, so that at the end of the day, and then at the end of the week, and at the end of the month, you've covered your costs, your labor isn't too high, and you've still been able to make a little money for the business.
So, and I know this just from experience, you are the heart, the lungs, the brain of the entire operation. How do you balance that with everything? Because again, a lot of people they say they want to own their own business and they want to be the boss. Yeah. What does that reality look like? So
it really is, in the restaurant business in general, again, like if this were a different type of business, it might be, I would assume, very different answer. But restaurant business is a lot like healthcare in that it is often 24 hours. Something comes up, a fryer goes down, staff member is ill, the dough didn't proof properly. And so just those three scenarios alone means a phone call to me, and it means my getting out of bed or getting there earlier than I had anticipated, and troubleshooting. So it's really a lot of round-the-clock commitment to the business. And so that really, in the last 5 years, you're sort of almost always on call. So it's both a challenge and, kind of a blessing in that you see exactly what's going on. You have your hands on almost every aspect of the business, but it can be very taxing as well. With the right staff, and again, we have had some really good folks who have helped us along the way, that is kept to a minimum. And so, or if something goes awry, you have the right person to call to say, hey, we need you to come in this weekend, and or can you help us, make another batch of dough? This one just failed because of the humidity or something like that.
So with that, and as taxing as that can be, and stressful, and no downtime, how long is that sustainable for you? Like, this is, it's successful. I mean, to be open for 5 years, to pivot from truck to retail spot, to have a respected brand. We show up on all the lists for top donuts.
Yes. And I've been very proud of that. We really,
Yeah.
I think we've had, from the beginning, because we had such good help at the very start in terms of consultants and great recipes and that kind of thing, we have an excellent product. And even 5 years later, I think we have the best donut and not just I think that, the local papers and Charlotte Magazine and so forth.
The numerous awards.
Yes, that's right. So I'm confident that we've done what we set out to do in terms of having just a beautiful donut and pastry here in Charlotte. But in answer to the question, how long was that the question?
Yeah.
Can you sustain yourself? I would say after 5 years, and a lot just has to do with what's going on in your life.
Right.
For me, 5 years ago, it was the perfect time for me to figure out or to put to the test, whether this concept was going to work and whether I could start my own business with a strong partner. But I would say 5 years later, it's timely for me, as my kids are now, my last child had just left for college, to start thinking about the next move and what I can do from here, what's going to be interesting to me going forward.
Because sometimes, whether it's a restaurant or any type of business, we get into it for the love, for the passion of it. We also get into it for a lifestyle, but sometimes we do want a lifestyle change. Sometimes we want different hours. Sometimes we want different accessibility. So if it weren't donuts, what would it be next?
Gosh, I don't know. I need to get a good night's rest for a change and figure that out. Likely something back in writing or consulting, something where I have a little more independence and a lot more time to myself.
At the end of the day, what is the sentence or picture that makes you proudest of Sugar?
I think we've had, first of all, a strong partnership. I think that we took something that was just an idea and made it into something that thousands and thousands of people in this city have experienced, and that makes me very proud. I feel like we did what we set out to do. I wanted to get in the kitchen, and I was able to do that for the last 5 years, and we wanted to make sure we had one of the best pastries in the city, and I think that we achieved that.
Looking back on things that I wish I would have known or could have done something differently or in a different manner, what are things that you look, one or two things that you'd say?
I think that one of the things that was a bit of a miscalculation, maybe a harsh word, but I would have done differently, is location. I thought that we opened the shop in a really strong part of town for our product. And I think that which was a suburban location. And in retrospect, I really think that we might have had a stronger performance earlier on if we had opened in an urban location where there's more walk-by traffic. But, it's the kind of thing that you don't know. We're surrounded by a really unusual number of both of mixed commercial and residential population. And so basically I was looking for where is Starbucks and where is Panera, and where they selected to land I felt was a good location for our product. And I think that has been true, but I think it would have been stronger had we chosen an urban location.
Excellent. Well,
I have no way to prove that, but that's what I think.
Well, with everything that, the successes and the lessons learned from this, I told you before, I think you have your next book.
Yeah, probably.
And it's something to be very proud of. So thank you very much for participating.
Thank you, Cass.
Thanks.